I'd give real money if he'd shut up.
Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country is a film close to my heart because I can remember seeing this film in cinema and remember being blown away by just how exciting and fun it was. Although the floating Klingon blood did used to freak me out a bit. I was only 7 at the time. It's been a long road for the TOS cast, but this film is a fitting way to say goodbye. Well, to most of them anyway. Well, after the big disappointment, not only critically but commercially for Star Trek V, many of the principal cast and crew believed that Star Trek V was the end of the road for the original series movies, and any future films would go in a different direction. At the time, Star Trek The Next Generation wasn't exactly pulling up any trees during its first 2 seasons, and it looked like Star Trek as a franchise was beginning to run its course. But as we all know, The Next Generation did begin to pick up in popularity by its 3rd and 4th seasons, with the excellent Season 3 finale, Best of Both Worlds Part 1, establishing Star Trek The Next Generation as a must-watch series. Fans were eager to see how things would be resolved in Season 4 with the epic cliffhanger. Star Trek looked like it was getting back on track, and by Season 5 the franchise would be celebrating its 25th anniversary. So Paramount wanted a 6th film to coincide with this milestone, but it was unclear if the original crew's story would continue, or if the executives would indeed take the franchise in a different direction. Harve Bennett wanted to further explore an idea by producer Ralph Winter from the early development of Star Trek IV. This idea was to go back to the Academy days of Kirk, Spock and McCoy. Here, we'd see how the trio met, have them deal with a threat, and then go their separate ways by the end. The story was to also include a plot where Kirk's father, George Kirk, would go missing during a warp experiment that involved Scotty. Early drafts of the script were being written that didn't include any of the original cast. Executives considered that fans wouldn't accept new actors in these roles, so rewrites took place to include original cast members in cameos, with the story being told as a flashback, bridging the old and new. However, the original cast simply were not happy with this idea and pushed back on this.
Go to hell.
Paramount executives were also not happy with how the script was taking shape, so this idea was ultimately scrapped, with a focus on a story centering around the original cast as a final outing. Some of this plot point was later picked up and incorporated into the Star Trek 2009 script, as I've mentioned before with my Star Trek IV review. Harve Bennett then left the project, having no further involvement with this film. There are different accounts as to whether Bennett was fired by Paramount executives due to the poor reception of the script from the TOS cast, or if he left of his own accord. Bennett stated that he was asked to continue to develop Star Trek VI, but as he wanted to do the Academy years, he simply didn't want to continue working on the film and felt that his time was up. Either way, Harve Bennett's involvement with producing and writing Star Trek films that started with 1982's The Wrath of Khan was officially over. Walter Koenig had also penned a story outline that involved the Romulans joining the Federation, then going to war against the Klingons, but this was in contrast to events depicted in Star Trek The Next Generation, so this idea was also rejected. Leonard Nimoy was also asked to come up with ideas, so he, along with Lawrence Connor and Mark Rosenthal, came up with an idea that would cross over the original crew with the TNG crew, but the producers of The Next Generation weren't willing to end their show just yet. Obviously, this would happen in the next film, in a more watered-down form in 1994's Star Trek Generations. Another person that was approached by executives to come up with an idea was Nicholas Meyer. Meyer met with Leonard Nimoy, who suggested that the wall would come down in space. This was to be an allegory for the Cold War, with the Klingons standing in for the Russians in the narrative, as there had been since the original series. Meyer conceived of an idea of a Chernobyl-type catastrophe in space that would cripple the Klingon Empire, opening up channels for peace talks. This would mirror current political events of the time. Meyer had also conceived the idea of the leader of the Klingon Empire, Gorkon, who was based on Mikhail Gorbachev and Abraham Lincoln, being a spearhead for the peace talks with the Federation being assassinated, as a whodunit plot with the Enterprise crew working to solve the conspiracy. Meyer, who had himself written Sherlock Holmes novels, references the works of Arthur Conan Doyle with the Sherlock-esque mystery plot. An early version of the script that Meyer had written with his friend Denny Martin Flynn had included a sequence at the start where the crew had to be rounded up out of their retirement for one final mission. This would have added further layers to the characters, showing their lives away from the Enterprise. Kirk would have settled down and been married to Carol Marcus, giving further weight to Kirk's prejudice for the loss of his son at the hands of the Klingons in Star Trek III. In one draft, Spock would have been performing in a Vulcan version of Hamlet, which I think would have been a bit daft, to be honest. With this later change to his whereabouts being classified, McCoy would have been drunk whilst attending a medical dinner reception.
This is fun.
Sulu would have been driving a taxi cab in a sprawling unnamed cityscape. Then this was changed to Sulu being a captain tasked with bringing the characters out of retirement himself. Scotty would have been working on the Klingon bird of prey, the HMS Bounty, recently pulled out from the bottom of San Francisco Bay. Uhura would have been a radio host and would have been glad for the chance to rejoin her friends and colleagues on the bridge of the Enterprise, with Chekhov playing chess, feeling bored with his retirement. This was all removed from the script due to budgetary reasons, with Sulu now the captain of the Excelsior, a plot thread that was written in for Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan but was ultimately dropped from that film. The crew would still be active, but with their retirement on the horizon. Meyer would then be offered the chance to direct, which he had no intention of doing whilst writing the script. This was a move that was supported by Nimoy, as this would ensure that William Shatner would not become angry or bitter if Nimoy would return to direct the sixth film. Although the concept of where the characters would have been during their retirement was interesting, I do think that the film didn't really need this, as it would have been a distraction from the main plot, and it allows us to jump straight into the main narrative. The story conceived by Nimoy and developed further by Meyer and Flynn is very intriguing, with lots of layers. It allows for the story to be split into subplots, with the crew of the Enterprise trying to get to the bottom of the conspiracy, with Kirk and McCoy being framed and attempting to escape a prison planet. The two main plots would then merge for the final act. The script gives everybody plenty to do, but I would argue that Sulu probably has the least amount of screen time, even though he's now captain of his own ship, who are also attempting to solve the mystery. At the start of the film, we finally get to see the Excelsior out and about and not just docked at Space Dock or breaking down outside. Sulu states in his captain's log that they've been on an exploratory mission to catalogue gaseous anomalies. This is a setup for the film's final battle, referred to as Chekhov's gun. No, not that Chekhov. Chekhov's gun is a principle written by Anton Chekhov where everything within a story must have a purpose, with anything irrelevant required to be removed. This serves as a setup early on which can often be overlooked or even almost forgotten about during the course of the story, only for it to reappear later on and used as a payoff. The concept, as the name states, is that if a gun is loaded in the first act, it must be fired before the end. It is a clever use of the setup and payoff, however, it was supposed to be the Excelsior crew who were to use the equipment to find the hidden bird of prey via a homing torpedo, according to George Takei in his autobiography. Takei stated that William Shatner had objected to this, as he felt that it should have been the Enterprise crew who came up with the idea of using this equipment, so it was changed in the script. I'm not sure how true this is, but it kind of fits that the Excelsior sets this up and the Enterprise pays this off. I mean, it is a really good subtle setup and it pays off brilliantly, and we get this gem of a line.
Fire.
Do you know what? I absolutely love this film. Unlike its predecessor, it's clever with an engaging story with tension, drama and plenty of action. It really does make the audience think about what's going on and draws them into the mystery. It's not just a generic plot where they do this and then they do that and there's lots of fights and explosions and CGI all over the screen to distract the viewer from how generic the story is. A lot like a lot of modern films, and New Trek included. The writing in this film is excellent. I would say that The Undiscovered Country has the most layered story of all the TOS films. The Wrath of Khan does have a pretty simple story, but that works in that film's favour. Although complex on the surface, The Search for Spock and The Voyage Home both have quite linear plots where the crew find themselves in situations that they need to get through. And The Final Frontier makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, so no need to go back over that one. And the motion picture, well, that one's a bit confusing as well. In fact, just go back and watch all my previous reviews of these films. The main theme of Star Trek VI is change. There are those who want change and will lobby for it for better or for worse. Then there are those who don't want change and are willing to conspire with their enemy to prevent it, which in itself is quite contradictory. Take Admiral Cartwright for instance. He looks visibly uncomfortable at the mere notion of peace with the Klingons. It makes his feelings very clear by stating that due to their economical and environmental state, this is the best time for the Federation to overcome their enemy, stating that they should bring them to their knees, then the Federation will be in a stronger position to dictate terms. He would capitalise on their current weakened state for a show of dominance. Now to me, that isn't extending an olive branch for peace, that's more like conquering and a dictatorship. On the Klingon side, you have General Chang, and if you add an E to the end of his name, what do you get? Change. Anyway, he's also conspiring with his enemy because he wants war. He would rather die fighting the Federation than become their ally, and he's willing to work with his enemy to ensure this. And then you have the Romulan ambassador, and it's clear why he wants war between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, as both sides will be weaker as a result, leaving the Romulans in a much stronger state than both. Yet all three actually do want change, but a different kind of change. This change is escalation instead of the posturing at one another. As they are all willing to work together to remain enemies, it is a very hypocritical point of view. They operate in that grey area. The Klingons aren't demonised as pure stock villains in this film. There are enemies on both sides. The conspiracy plot twists and turns where it's not simply one person or a small group who are trying to stop peace, but multiple people within both the Federation and the Klingon Empire. How high into these governments does this conspiracy go? Who is involved, and who can or cannot be trusted? Anyone can be a suspect. The film also deals with the fact that prejudices still exist in the 23rd century. Kirk bears much hatred towards Klingons because of the death of his son at the hands of a Klingon crew in Star Trek 3. His views and feelings towards Klingons change during the course of the film as he comes to realise that his views are very much old-fashioned and misplaced. He comes to this realisation when he is deep in contemplation of both his and McCoy's situations at Rura Penthe. He acknowledges that Gorkon had to die before he realised how prejudiced he was, and he is used to hating Klingons. He's shown just how outmoded his views really are. If you want peace, you have to put aside your differences and prejudices. Kirk is clear on his opinions at the start of the film, but has a moral understanding of what the right thing is to do, even if he doesn't agree. He's willing to put duty over his own views. He even tries to throw it in Spock's face by inviting Chancellor Gorkon and his party aboard the Enterprise for a meal, just to show Spock just how different the Federation and Klingons are. The dinner scene is pivotal. It shows the stark differences between the two cultures. Just look at the confusion on the Klingons' faces with the napkins. They don't follow the same kind of etiquette, which is just strange to them. Kirk also looks visibly agitated. The claim of not really experiencing Shakespeare until you've read it in the original Klingon and Chang's constant jibes and provocation just irks Kirk. Kirk even knocks back the Romulan now just to try and get through the evening. Chang is a brilliant villain. It's very much your mustache twirling villain who is so animated, with Christopher Plummer chewing the scenery. It is excellent. He's possibly up there with Khan as one of the best villains in Star Trek, but maybe not quite there? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. It is funny how Chang is constantly quoting Shakespeare. And to be fair, old Bill Shakespeare does look a little bit like a Klingon with that big forehead. Maybe he was a Klingon and he was marooned in England back in the 16th century. A little Star Trek conspiracy there for you. I think all of this brashness and goading with the Klingon Shakespeare quoting makes Chang out to be a much more menacing villain, who is very much toying with the Enterprise in the final battle. Kirk is placed in a situation where he's the most obvious choice to be framed for the assassination of Chancellor Gorkon. Due to Kirk's past dealings with the Klingons, being labelled as a renegade in the Klingon Empire, he's very much a believable person to orchestrate such a plot, as, on the surface, he has clear motives. Kirk's crew work hard to help solve the conspiracy and help Kirk and McCoy escape captivity. This shows again that the crew works best together as a team. Everyone has a part to play in this, and everyone is excellent in the film with no one hamming it up or chewing the scenery. Well, other than Christopher Plummer, but again, that's brilliant. And we also get a new Vulcan character, Lieutenant Valeris, played by Kim Cattrall. The character was originally written to be Saavik, but this was changed to a new character because it may have been hard to accept Saavik as a traitor and a conspirator. Upon further watches, Valeris is an obvious suspect in the conspiracy, with some subtle nods to this and some not so subtle. The way in which she commands the two crewmen to get on with their duties with the camera lingering on her face for a short while is quite telling. I suppose once you know what's going to happen, that is. Kirk's captain's log was also used against him at the trial, but the recording wasn't exactly how he said it.
I've never trusted Klingons, and I never will. I can never forgive them for the death of my boy. I've never trusted Klingons, and I never will. I've never been able to forgive them for the death of my boy.
It's almost as if someone heard this, then programmed an AI to recreate his voice, but it sounded unnatural and was obviously faked. Kirk admits to saying those words, but this is where he starts to realise that he's indeed being framed.
Figures.
Valeris soon enters the captain's quarters, having been stood in the open doorway. She obviously would have heard this log. She was also the one that suggests that they drink Romulan ale during the dinner scene, a strong alcoholic drink, knowing full well what was to come. And there's some not so subtle hints. I did notice that after the 1000th time of watching, that Valeris presses a lot of buttons on her console, which ends with the torpedo being fired at Kronos 1. Did she reprogram the computer and fire the torpedo right in front of our eyes? I might be clutching at straws with this one because it is very subtle, but I do think she does do that. Another subtle sign is that she wears a mismatched uniform. A tunic straps and sleeve band are grey, with the undershirt collar red. The undershirt and tunic straps are supposed to match, signifying which department the officer is a member of. Grey is the science team, and red is a cadet. She also has the rank of Lieutenant Commander, which is quite a high rank for a new recruit. I believe that this was an oversight by the wardrobe department, but maybe this does have deeper meaning. I do think that this helps to single her out as someone who isn't quite right. She has no specific allegiance, playing both sides. A mismatched uniform could very well be a subtle hint to this. But what do you think? Am I seeing something that isn't quite there? As Chekhov says,
if shoe fits, wear it.
Again, she is an obvious suspect because she's a new character that the audience have not seen before. She is expendable within the plot. The idea of this being Savick would have been quite intriguing. She would have been much harder to suspect, and it really would have packed a hard punch, being quite the plot twist. There are some familiar faces within the supporting cast, with both Mark Leonard Sarek and Brock Peters' Admiral Cartwright returning. David Warner also returns for the second film in a row, this time as Chancellor Gorkon. With Michael Dorn appearing as Colonel Worf, the grandfather of Lieutenant Worf from Star Trek The Next Generation, Renee Auberjonois as Colonel West, Clarence Boddicker himself, Kurtwood Smith as the Federation President, and, in a small cameo, Christian Slater. Christian Slater's mother, Mary Jo Slater, was the casting director, and as a Star Trek fan, he was delighted to be able to make a cameo, stating that he finally managed to get into Shatner's pants. He wore the very same trousers as part of his Starfleet uniform that Shatner wore in Star Trek II. Once the mystery has been solved, the Enterprise races against time to stop another assassination and bring down the conspirators, which leads the Enterprise into a gripping final battle against an invisible enemy. This final battle is brilliant. Unlike the battle in the Mutara Nebula from Star Trek II, which was more of a cat and mouse encounter, this battle is more like the cat has caught the mouse and is toying with it, but Chang underestimates his opponent. The bird of prey batters the Enterprise to Chang's enjoyment. Chang is playing with his enemy, overconfident and almost like a sadistic child. This ultimately comes back to bite him hard. And as discussed earlier, this is where Chekhov's gun is fired. This film had to be made on a fairly tight budget of $30 million, so a lot of the sets that were already in use for Star Trek The Next Generation were redressed and reused. Some are subtle, such as Councillor Troy's quarters doubling as the galley, and Data's quarters doubling for Spock's quarters. The ones that are not so subtle are the main engineering, which I find a little bit jarring as to why a Constitution starship built over 75 years before a Galaxy class would have the same type of warp core, the officers' mess, that was the Enterprise D's observation lounge, and the President's office, which was 10 forward. A lot of the corridors were also reused, however they were reworked to be much narrower than shown in The Next Generation, giving the Enterprise a much more claustrophobic look, more akin to a submarine. I do think that redressing sets can make it look a little bit like they're doing things on the cheap, which there were, but it does mostly work to be fair. I really do like the look and the layout of the Enterprise's bridge in this film, which was reworked from Star Trek V.
There's nothing wrong with the bloody thing.
And overall, the Enterprise is depicted like a real vessel, showing how things actually work. It feels lived in and used, but at the same time looking futuristic. ILM were also able to return to provide the special effects, and if you compare the special effects from this film to Star Trek V, it's like night and day. Once again, all the effects look amazing for its time, most of which still stand up today. The only exception is the two Kirks. This does look a little bit off in some shots, especially when one Kirk points at another, pointing in the wrong direction. But you could possibly put this down to the fact that Martia is shorter than Kirk, so when in Kirk's form and now the same height, she naturally pointed up, making it more obvious to the Klingons which one isn't the real Kirk. Jerry Goldsmith was approached to return to score the film, but turned this offer down due to the poor performance of Star Trek V. James Horner was also approached, and again, he turned this offer down. Meyer then explored the possibility of utilising Gustav Holst's music for the planets. This idea proved to be an expense that the production just couldn't afford, so he began listening to music submitted by composers. One such tape was from a young composer called Cliff Idleman. Meyer met with Idleman and was impressed by the way that he wanted to approach this film's score. The film itself is much darker than previous entries, so he wanted the music to complement this. Idleman was able to take inspiration from Jerry Goldsmith's and James Horner's scores, as well as the music from the planets, and craft something unique yet familiar. There are some familiar motifs, however, especially Spock's theme that is really similar to Horner's theme for Spock. I also think that the main theme is quite similar to Danny Elfman's theme for Batman 1989. I can definitely hear the similarities between the two themes, or maybe I'm just hearing something that isn't there. But again, let me know what you think in the comments. I do quite like that this score is much less bombastic than previous scores, but at the same time filled with its own energy. Personally, I would have preferred a James Horner score for this film, but by no means does it make this film weaker as a result. As I've stated before in my Star Trek IV review, I'm not a fan of the music in that film, which I do think hurts the movie. But the score for Star Trek VI is really good, even if I personally would have preferred a James Horner score. That said, the music during the final battle is also great, as it starts quietly and ramps up as the scene progresses, building up to when the Enterprise fires its torpedo. It has been well documented that Gene Roddenberry wasn't happy with much of the film and requested some changes be made that producers rejected. Following a screening of the rough cut of the film, Roddenberry made his thoughts known, which resulted in a heated exchange between himself and Nicholas Meyer. Meyer was unaware of just how unwell Roddenberry was at the time and has stated that he regretted this exchange. Gene Roddenberry passed away on the 24th of October 1991 prior to the film's release. The film is dedicated to him. Prior to the release of this film, Leonard Nimoy had appeared in the Next Generation Season 5 two-parter, Unification, portraying Spock. In the second episode of the two-parter, the events of Star Trek VI are briefly mentioned. The episodes aired in November 1991, which did help to increase interest in Star Trek VI prior to its release. The film was released on the 6th of December 1991, earning just short of $97 million at the worldwide box office, so it did pretty well. It received mostly positive reviews, being far better received than Star Trek V, which is a surprise to absolutely nobody. To summarise, I feel that this is a fantastic film. I listed this at number 2 in my list of all 13 Star Trek films, with Sean listing this at number 3 behind First Contact. Obviously, we both went with The Wrath of Khan in at number 1. As I've mentioned before, I absolutely love this film, with its twisting plot, which is full of drama, tension and energy. Meyer seems to add things in that expand upon the world, such as showing us more about how a starship operates, and helps to expand upon the lore of the Klingons that has only been touched upon in previous films, but was developed much further in The Next Generation. There are also some clever little character moments in the film, such as Sulu commanding his helmsman to turn the ship into the wave, calling upon his extensive experience as a helmsman himself. And Spock subtly sticking a tracking patch to Kirk's shoulder before he beams over to the Klingon ship after the assassination, knowing that he needs to take precautions due to the events that are unfolding. And during the trial scene, Chang looks visibly disappointed that Kirk and McCoy were sent to the Rurapente prison planet. My guess is that he wanted a quick death for Kirk and McCoy so that they were out of the way.
Better to kill them now and get it over with.
This is backed up by the fact that there is a price on their head when they arrive at the prison. Another thing that I noticed is that the events of this film after the Praxis explosion are set in motion by Sarek. This is only a very minor detail, but Sarek instructs Spock to open communications with the Klingons for peace talks. This instruction starts a cascade of events, resulting in Kirk and McCoy being framed for Gorkon's assassination, then escaping captivity, with the Enterprise crew unravelling the conspiracy, exposing all the conspirators, resulting in the peace talks ultimately being successful. A butterfly effect, one might say. I would highly recommend this film to anyone who's a fan of sci-fi, action and adventure, and although Star Trek fans might get more enjoyment out of this film, I do think this is a film that can be enjoyed by anyone. The two main plots make it both a mystery whodunit film as well as a prisoner escape film, with the two plots converging for the final act. And to answer the question, is this a fitting end to the TOS movie series? Yes, I think it's a great ending, with the Enterprise sailing off into the sun. And that, dear viewer, brings me to the end of this review and the review of all 6 Star Trek TOS films. And I've got to say, I've really enjoyed re-exploring these films, including Star Trek V, but I think it's fair to say that I'm all Star Trek'd out now, so we are going to focus on other movies for upcoming reviews. We'll probably come back to the Next Generation movies in the not-so-distant future, and possibly the Kelvin Trek films, but don't hold your breath with those ones. In fact, here's a quick review. The first one's good, the third one's okay, the second one is dog shit.
What is it with you, anyway?
On that note, I'd like to leave you by saying a massive thank you for watching this review. If you could like and share the video, then we would really appreciate that. And if you haven't already done so, then go give that subscribe button a press. I've been Colm from the Critical Cinema Club, and I'll see you soon.